Okay, we're going to deal with one of Leighton Flowers' constant objections to Calvinists in saying that, according to us, God is not as merciful as Paul in Romans 9, because Paul prays for the salvation of his Israelite brothers. We're going to deal with prayer, and we're going to deal with Molinism. I'm going to just repeat the things I've said in another video about prayer, because I'm just going to say it over and over. We're going to say it over and over. And these guys, Tim and Leighton actually claim to have been Calvinists in the past. And I guess you forgot what we believed, or maybe you had a view of it. Tim, you said you were a cage stage Calvinist. You must have forgotten what we believe and why and all that, because or you just can't see. But anyway, we'll deal with that when we get to dealing with prayer, okay? But let's continue on here with one of Leighton's constant objections.
I believe he's causally determining something.
That's right.
So I think it makes sense for us to ask for our Father in heaven to guide us and to give us a patience and an understanding for how to reach our lost friends, as Paul prays in Romans chapter 10, verse 1, when he says, I pray for my countrymen. I pray for their salvation. He desires and longs for their salvation. Earlier in chapter 9, he said he was willing to give up his own salvation for them. And I don't think that Paul is more merciful than Christ, which the Calvinists would have to say that Christ didn't die for them, but Paul was willing to. And that's it.
Leighton, would you send a flood on the entire human race to kill everybody except for like 8 people, except for Noah and his family, kill men, women, children, little babies? Would you send a flood to do that? Would you pray, God, please don't send this flood, have mercy? Would you pray for that? Would you pray? Right now we're going through the COVID. Would you pray, please God, don't let people die from COVID? Yet they die. God allows them to die. He has the power to stop it, doesn't he? What about the tsunami that wiped out 250,000 people in India and that whole area? Would you pray, God, please don't do this. Please, God, don't wipe out these people. I could go on and on and on, Brother Leighton. Does that make you more merciful than God because he allows it to happen? He is the ultimate cause of it, correct? God's in control of nature in your view, correct? Right? God is the one who sent the flood, right? Do you pray, God, please don't send people to hell? Now that's their libertarian free will choice, right? That's what you're going to say. God still sends people to hell. Why doesn't he just snuff them out so they don't go to hell, so they just cease to exist like a lot of annihilationists believe? And I don't think you believe that. Does that make you more merciful than God because you don't want those things to happen, because you pray for them not to happen? Have you prayed for anybody? God, please don't let this person die, please. And yet they die. God was the one who allowed it to happen, right? He could have stopped it. Does that make you more merciful? God has a plan that we cannot see for his glory, and that's the purpose. It's not arbitrary. It's for his glory. He has a plan that we can't see always. Sometimes you can see it. We know now the crucifixion, why that occurred. From hindsight, we can see some things that are in God's decree and why he allows things to happen, and why he allows the wicked to perish. Okay? And ultimately, he is the determiner of all these things. He has to be. Well, of course, you don't agree with that. You believe we can create. We're autonomous. Some of the things you've said are very concerning and don't fit consistently into a biblical theistic worldview of God's sovereignty, where his will is never thwarted. His will always occurs, according to a lot of passages. So let's continue on here.
The troublesome interpretation of passages like Romans 9 and 10.
Leighton, just before I came on this show today, I was listening to Pine Creek, who's an atheist YouTuber. I think you're aware of him. And he was doing a show where he was responding to a couple of presuppositionalist Calvinists. And what he was saying ultimately, he also responded to me on the same show. But about them, what he was saying was, why are you guys even, what's even the point? Because if I'm going to be a Christian, then I'll find out eventually, because God will irresistibly grace me. And of course, we're not speaking here to the question of whether or not Calvinist or evangelistic.
Okay. Leighton and Tim should know the response that we're going to have to this. God uses means, us as his means, to accomplish that. Here's my question to you, Braxton. Why are you trying to convince them? No matter how much light you give them, are you trying to persuade them? Does that make it more likely that they get saved? Leighton's talking about how he talks to his dad to get pull and influence in, I think it's the Southern Baptist Church. Is that decisive, Leighton? When you ask your dad, hey, can you do this for me in here, playing politics in the Southern Baptist Convention? Is that decisive? So when you pray, is that decisive? You say, oh, God doesn't causally determine it. Is it decisive? Does it make it more likely that it occurs? So your prayers do affect their salvation. So if you didn't pray, they wouldn't be saved, correct? Do you believe that? See, that's what I'm saying. If you accept libertarian free will, there's no reason, maybe just to tell them, hey, Jesus died for your sins and rose again. Bye. Your choice now. Affecting their libertarian free will. You're trying to affect their libertarian free will choice? Shouldn't you just coldly tell them, Jesus died for your sins, choose. Bye-bye. Why don't you just do that? You're trying to pray to give influence. Does that make it more like, see the problems with libertarian free will?
That whole business.
Yeah.
Fortunately, many of them are very evangelistic, and I'm glad for that. The point is,
because we believe God is using us.
Was saying to these two presuppositionalist Calvinists, isn't God going to irresistibly grace me at some point? So back to Tim's.
He could through them. They could be the means by them being saved. Are you trying to sway him? Change his libertarian free will choice? Why? Is that... What's the point of that? It's ultimately up to him. Correct? Does it make a difference? Like, if you did not preach and try to persuade him, would he not accept and go to hell? So ultimately it would be up to you and the way you persuaded him, right? That would be the decisive factor in him accepting or rejecting. Is that what you believe?
Point of, should I be really praying for the salvation of my friend, or should I be playing Xbox right now?
No, you should be praying.
It's an interesting.
If you're led, you can play Xbox too. That's fun.
Interesting thing.
Mm-hmm. You want to add anything to that, Tim?
I just believe that prayer actually makes a difference. And I think that's what the Bible implies, if not clearly states.
So it does make a difference. So your prayers can affect their will. So if you didn't pray, they would have went to hell rather than heaven. Isn't that the compulsion that you're not trying to, the decisive factor you're not trying to, the determining factor? Is that the determining factor? Is that one? You see, isn't the ultimate determining factor of if they go to heaven or hell their choice? It doesn't matter how much you pray, how much you try to persuade. What matters is their libertarian free will choice, correct?
We
dealt with this before.
That prayer actually makes a difference, that you should pray.
Wow.
Not only that you can pray and that you could pray, but you should pray and you can fail to pray. And that it actually makes a difference. And, on the Molinistic view, we can make sense of that. And I discussed that in my book too. So.
Okay, now I'm going to finish off here and deal with Molinism. So, Molinism is the view that God sees all these possibilities of what could happen through libertarian free will choices, right? He sees all these possible worlds that could have happened. Here's my question about that. So say like in our world, there's a lost person. Now this is kind of a little side thing of my objection to Molinism. I'm sure you dealt with it in your philosophical objection to Calvinism with Molinism. I'm sure you brought this up. And you did earlier about with Molinism. And it's how it can help or whatever in this situation. Are you really going to argue, Brother Tim, and I think Braxton is a Molinist as well, are you really going to argue that a lost person in every possible world will reject Jesus. Are you really going to argue that? How about every saved person? Are you really going to argue that in every possible world they will accept Christ and be saved? So, if you're going to argue that, so the lost person will always reject. So if he's born in a Muslim country, or he's born in Texas or someplace that has a ton of gospel light, it doesn't matter. That person will always choose Christ. Are you really going to argue that? Most Molinists that I talk to will say no. There's a possible world where I freely choose to reject, or I freely choose to accept. So you see the problem here. I just happen to be in the world, lucky me, that where I accept, freely accept. If God had chosen another world, I could have freely rejected, correct? Unless you're going to say in every single possible world I would accept. And also all the billions of people, are you really going to say that every single person that accepted would always accept in every possible world, and every person that rejects would always reject? I don't think I've met one Molinist that would say that. Maybe there are some out there, but you see, like, this doesn't help. Like you say that they have no culpability. Well, couldn't the person just simply go? From the Calvinist view, they say they have no culpability if they're just determined to believe. To not believe or to believe. You have no culpability if you're not going to believe. Okay? If you have no choice, right? Which, of course, we do believe you have choice, but yes, we do believe that ultimately God's will is the one who hardens God, and that they're born in sin, and then God hardens, and there's degrees of hardening, and then God has mercy on certain vessels, and it's God's will. Most of what you guys are saying here is just the Romans 9 objector, and why does he blame us for who resists his will? That's that's the essence of your objections. Leighton says, well, no, that's the hardened the Israelite. That could be, yes, it could be applied to the hardened Israelite. And maybe that's who Paul's thinking of, that's one of the main groups that he's thinking of in that passage. It could very well be that. But Paul also could be talking to a Gentile that's hardened. Because you know why I believe that could apply to the Gentile? Because just in the earlier verses, he mentions Pharaoh, who's not an Israelite, who was hardened. So it could apply to anybody. It could be, the objector could be anybody. The objector could be a Jew, and maybe that's Paul's targeting the Jews right there. He's thinking of them. I mean, there's no massive indication of that, but he could be thinking of them there. Or this could apply to the hardened Gentile, Pharaoh, who he just mentioned in the verses earlier. Okay, so basically what your objection here, a lot of your objections that you're talking about here are the Romans 9 objector. Just like the French philosopher said. So here's my thing. Couldn't an atheist or somebody who rejects just go, man, I was just born in the wrong possible universe. Why didn't God choose a universe where I freely accept and go to heaven? You see how you don't accept, you don't get out of the objection. The atheist isn't going to go, whoa, wow, that makes sense. That's so much better than Calvinists. Maybe there might be an atheist just to stir up trouble because he hates Calvinists or something, or he doesn't like Calvinism. He might say, oh, that's much better than Calvinism. But I've met a lot of atheists that most of them don't care about that stuff. And most of them have darkened hearts anyway, and you guys believe that they can obey God's law. That's what I dealt with in the other video. But here's the thing. They could just say to your Molinism, Braxton and Tim, why wasn't I born in a world where I accept and go to heaven? Couldn't they just say that to you guys? Unless you're going to say in every possible world, the atheist is always going to reject. Or all of the atheists are always going to reject all of the unbelievers. Do you see what I'm saying? You see how you don't remove the problem of the objector in Romans 9. You just move it back a step to the possible world situation. You see, Molinism doesn't solve the issue of the objector, just moves it back a step. The objector could just say, hey, why wasn't I born in a world where I freely accept? And then the prayer thing, I've dealt with that. So anyway, and that's a whole other issue with Molinism, is prayer and all that stuff. So, like, Tim, is there a world where you didn't play Xbox and you prayed, that. And anyway, I'm not going to get into that too deeply, but that's gone long enough here. But hopefully you see my point. Molinism doesn't help you guys. It doesn't. Okay, God bless.